The horse beneath Xavier Ashford was half dead from exhaustion when Canon City, Colorado finally emerged from the dusty horizon like a mirage that refused to fade. And what he saw made his heart sink deeper than it had in all his 32 years of wandering this unforgiving frontier. It was September of 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on a collection of weathered buildings that looked ready to surrender to the wind and time. Half the storefronts stood empty with broken windows staring out like hollow eyes. The saloon sign hung by a single rusted chain, creaking in the breeze. The church steeple leaned slightly to the left as if even God had given up trying to keep it straight. Xavier had seen dying towns before, plenty of them scattered across the west like forgotten graves, but something about this one called to him. Maybe it was the way the mountains rose up behind it, proud and eternal, or maybe it was just that he was tired of running from nothing and toward nothing. His dark hair hung past his collar, dusty from weeks on the trail, and his jaw carried several days' worth of stubble. The star he used to wear was buried somewhere in New Mexico, along with the ideals that had kept it polished. He guided his mare down what passed for a main street, noting the few signs of life. A blacksmith's forge sat cold and abandoned. The general store had a faded sign in the window that read "Open, maybe." An old-timer sat on a bench outside what might have been a boarding house, whittling a piece of wood into shapes that made no sense. The man looked up as Xavier passed, his rheumy eyes taking in the stranger with neither interest nor concern. "You lost, son." The old-timer called out, his voice like gravel in a tin can. "Depends on what you think I'm looking for," Xavier replied, bringing his horse to a stop. The mare's sides heaved with relief. "Ain't nothing here to find. Town's dying. Most folks already moved on to Leadville or Denver. Mining dried up. Railroad never came through like they promised. Now it's just us stubborn fools waiting for the end." Xavier dismounted, his legs stiff from days in the saddle. "Where can I water my horse and get a meal?" The old-timer pointed a gnarled finger toward a building that still had glass in most of its windows. "Clara's place. She still serves food, though don't expect much variety. And she's just as stubborn as the rest of us about staying. Clara." The name stuck in Xavier's mind as he led his horse toward the building. It had a hand-painted sign that read "Clara's Kitchen and Boarding." The paint was fading, but someone had obviously cared enough to make it look nice once. The porch steps creaked under his weight but held firm. Through the window, he could see a woman moving around inside, her silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the far windows. The door opened with a gentle ring of a bell, and Xavier stepped into another world entirely. While the town outside looked ready to blow away, this place was clean and well-maintained. The wooden floors gleamed with fresh wax. Curtains, though simple, hung straight and pressed. A dozen tables sat ready for customers who probably never came, each with a small vase holding wildflowers that must have been picked that very morning. And then there was her. Clara Cunningham looked up from where she was wiping down a table near the window, and Xavier felt something shift in his chest. She was perhaps 28 or 29, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun that still managed to look elegant. Her dress was simple calico, faded from many washings but clean and mended with careful stitches. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as the Colorado high country in spring, and filled with a wariness that spoke of disappointments weathered and survived. "We're open," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise as if customers were an unexpected novelty. "You can sit anywhere you like." Xavier chose a table near the window where he could watch the street and his horse, a habit from years of living carefully. "What do you have?" "Beef stew, cornbread, and coffee. Apple pie if you want dessert. She moved closer and he caught the faint scent of cinnamon and soap. The stew's fresh. Made it this morning. I'll take all of it, he said, realizing he hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. And my horse needs water and feed if you can tell me where to take her. There's a trough out back and a small stable. Help yourself to the feed. I'll have your meal ready when you return. She paused, studying him with those sharp green eyes. You just passing through? Don't rightly know yet, Xavier answered honestly. Something flickered across her face there and gone too quick to read. Well, the stew will taste the same either way. Xavier led his horse around back, finding everything just as she had described. The stable was small but well maintained, with 2 other horses already there, both looking better fed than most of the humans he had seen in town. He unsaddled his mare, brushed her down, made sure she had plenty of water and feed. The animal nickered gratefully, and he patted her neck. We might stay here a bit, girl, he murmured. Get our strength back. When he returned to the dining room, a steaming bowl of stew waited at his table, along with a generous piece of cornbread and a cup of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. Clara was back at the window table, working on some mending, but she glanced up as he entered. The stew was the best thing Xavier had tasted in months. Tender beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions in a rich brown gravy that had been seasoned by someone who actually cared about cooking. The cornbread was moist and slightly sweet. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and noticed Clara watching him from the corner of her eye. This is excellent, he said, and meant it. My mother's recipe, Clara replied, not looking up from her mending. She ran this place before me. Said that just because times are hard doesn't mean people should eat poorly. Wise woman. She was. The past tense hung heavy in the air. Xavier finished his meal in companionable silence, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. When he was done, Clara brought him a slice of apple pie that melted in his mouth. He could not remember the last time someone had fed him with such care. What do I owe you? He asked, reaching for the coins in his pocket. $2 for the meal, 50 cents for the stable. She held out her hand, and he placed the coins in her palm, noticing the calluses there, the strength in her fingers. This was a woman who worked hard for everything she had. You have rooms available? The question came out before he had really decided to ask it. Clara's eyes met his directly. I have 6 rooms, all of them empty except mine. $3 a week includes breakfast and dinner. I'll take one. For how long? A week to start, Xavier said. Maybe longer. She nodded slowly as if weighing his words for truth. Room 3, top of the stairs on the left. The bed's made fresh. There's a wash basin and pitcher. Outhouse is out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed. I heat water for baths on Saturday evenings if you want one. That sounds fine. Clara went to a small desk in the corner and pulled out a ledger, opening it to a page that was mostly blank. I'll need your name. Xavier Ashford. She wrote it carefully in neat script. Where are you from, Mr. Ashford? Most recently, New Mexico. Before that, Kansas. Before that, a lot of other places. Running from something or towards something, he met her gaze. Neither, just moving. Well, there's not much moving happening in Canon City anymore. Most folks are leaving, not arriving. Why are you staying? The question was bold, perhaps too bold for a first meeting, but something about Clara made him want to know. She set down her pen and closed the ledger. This is my home. My parents built this business from nothing. They're buried in the cemetery on the hill. My whole life is here. Just because the town is dying doesn't mean I have to abandon it. Even if you're the last one left, even then. Her voice was steady, but he saw the loneliness in her eyes, the weight of being one of the few who refused to give up. Xavier picked up his saddlebags and headed upstairs. Room 3 was exactly as advertised, simple but scrupulously clean. The bed was made with crisp white sheets and a colorful quilt that looked handmade. The wash basin was full of fresh water. A small table by the window held an oil lamp and a few books. He looked at the titles: Ivanhoe, The Last of the Mohicans, and a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. Interesting choices. He unpacked his few belongings, hanging his extra shirt on a peg and placing his gun belt on the bedside table within easy reach. Old habits. Then he lay down on the bed, just meaning to rest his eyes for a moment, and fell into the first deep sleep he had had in weeks. When Xavier woke, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. He could hear movement downstairs, the gentle clatter of dishes and pots. Rising, he washed his face in the basin, changed his shirt, and headed down to find 3 other people seated at the tables. One was the old-timer from the bench, now looking slightly more animated. The second was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, wearing a faded dress. The third was a young man, maybe 20, with the lean build of someone who worked physically hard but did not get quite enough to eat. Clara was serving them all the same stew and cornbread Xavier had enjoyed, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. She glanced up when he appeared but said nothing, just gestured toward his previous table where a place had been set. "Figured you might wake up hungry again," she said, bringing him a fresh bowl. "This is what passes for the dinner crowd in Canon City these days." The old-timer raised his spoon in greeting. "Name's Walter Pierce. Been here since this town was founded in 1858. Seen it grow, seen it prosper, and now I'm seeing it die." "This is Martha Dixon," Clara continued, indicating the middle-aged woman. "She runs the boarding house, what's left of it. And that's Tommy Chen. His family used to run a laundry, but they moved to Denver last year. Tommy stayed." Tommy nodded at Xavier, his expression cautious. "Figured I'd try my luck with the few mining claims left. Haven't struck anything yet, but I'm stubborn." "Stubbornness seems to be a requirement for living here," Xavier observed, and Walter laughed. "You got that right, son. We're all too stubborn or too stupid to know when we're beaten. Or too loyal to abandon what we love," Clara said quietly, setting down Xavier's coffee. They ate together, this small group of holdouts, and Xavier learned the story of Canon City. It had been founded after gold was discovered nearby. For 20 years it had thrived. Then the easy gold ran out. The promised railroad chose a different route. Businesses closed one by one. Families packed up and left. The population that had once numbered in the thousands had dwindled to maybe 50 souls, and those were dropping every month. "Why don't you all leave together?" Xavier asked. "Start fresh somewhere else, and give up." Walter's voice was sharp. "I helped build this town. I ain't letting it die without a fight, even if that fight is just me sitting on that bench every day, proving we're still here." Martha spoke up, her voice soft. "My husband and 2 of my children are buried here. I won't leave them alone." Tommy shrugged. "I was born here. Never lived anywhere else. Besides, I think there's still gold in these hills. Just need to find it." Clara said nothing, but Xavier saw the emotion in her eyes. These were her people, what remained of her community, and she felt responsible for them in some way. After dinner, Walter and Martha left together, heading back to their respective establishments. Tommy lingered, helping Clara clear the tables. Xavier started to rise, but Clara waved him back down. "You're a guest. You don't work." "I don't mind helping. Suit yourself." She handed him a dish towel. "You can dry." They worked in companionable silence in the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive cast iron stove that Clara must have fed constantly to keep it ready for cooking. Everything was organized with military precision. Pots and pans hanging in order of size, spices lined up alphabetically, dishes stacked neatly on open shelves. Tommy said his goodbyes and headed out into the gathering darkness. Clara lit oil lamps around the kitchen and dining room, each one casting a warm glow. Xavier finished drying the last plate and looked around for where it belonged. "Top shelf, on the right," Clara directed, scrubbing the stew pot with strong, even strokes. He put it away and turned to find her watching him. "What brings a man like you to Canon City?" she asked. "And don't tell me you just happened to be passing through. Nobody just happens to pass through a dying town at the end of nowhere." Xavier leaned against the counter, considering how much truth to share. There was something about Clara that demanded honesty. "I used to be a lawman, town marshal in a place called Cimarron, New Mexico. I thought I was doing good work, keeping people safe, upholding justice. Used to be. I arrested a man for murder. Had witnesses, had evidence. The trial was supposed to be a formality. Then the man's brother showed up with money and connections, and suddenly my witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. The judge ruled not guilty. 2 weeks later, the man killed another person, a woman this time. A woman I had promised I would protect." Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I followed the law, believed in the system, and she died because of it. So I took off my star and left. Been wandering for the better part of a year, trying to figure out what I believe in anymore." "And have you figured it out?" "No, but I'm tired of wandering." She pulled the plug from the sink and dried her hands on her apron. "This town is dying, Mr. Ashford. I'm not sure it's the best place for a man looking to stop wandering. Maybe a dying town needs someone who knows how to fight, even if he's not sure what he's fighting for anymore." Clara studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "And maybe a dying town is just that, dying, and nothing can save it. Maybe the kindest thing would be to let it go peacefully." "Is that what you believe?" "I don't know what I believe anymore either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just know I can't leave." Xavier understood that feeling better than she could know. "Then maybe we're both exactly where we need to be." She did not answer, just turned down the lamps until only one remained burning in the dining room for anyone who might need it in the night. "I rise at 5 to start breakfast," she said. "You don't have to be up that early, but the food's ready at 6 if you want it." "I'll be there." Clara nodded and headed toward a door at the back of the kitchen that must lead to her private quarters. She paused at the threshold. "Thank you for the help with the dishes. You didn't have to." "I know." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that needed no words. Then she was gone, and Xavier climbed the stairs to his room, already knowing he would not be leaving Canon City after just 1 week. The next morning, Xavier was up before dawn, drawn by the smell of coffee and bacon. He found Clara in the kitchen, her hair in a loose braid down her back, flour dusting her hands as she worked biscuit dough. She glanced up when he entered. "Coffee's on the stove. Cups are in the cabinet." He poured himself a cup and watched her work. Her movements were efficient and practiced, hands shaping the biscuits with quick precision. "You do this every morning for the past 8 years. Before that, I helped my mother do it. For how many people these days?" "However many show up. Some mornings it's just Walter and Martha. Sometimes a traveler or two, doesn't matter. The food's ready either way." Xavier sipped his coffee, which was strong and good. "You need help around here. Repairs, maintenance, that sort of thing." Clara slid a pan of biscuits into the oven. "Why?" "Because I need something to do, and you look like you could use an extra pair of hands. I noticed some loose boards on your porch steps, and the sign out front could use some fresh paint." "I can't pay much." "I'm not asking for much. Just keep feeding me like you did yesterday. Let me keep the room, and we'll call it even." She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face him fully. "Why would you do that?" Work for just room and board in a dying town. Because maybe I'm tired of everything dying without anyone trying to save it. Maybe I want to be part of something that fights back, even if it's just keeping one building in good repair. Clara's expression softened. You're a strange man, Xavier Ashford. I've been called worse. The hint of a smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing a beauty that had been hidden beneath layers of weariness and worry. All right, you can do repairs, but if you're working, you eat 3 meals a day, not 2. I won't have you collapsing from hunger while fixing my porch. Deal. They shook on it, her hand small but strong in his, and Xavier felt that shift in his chest again, stronger this time. He was in trouble and he knew it. A man could lose his heart to a woman like Clara Cunningham, without even realizing it was happening until it was too late. Breakfast brought the same small crowd as dinner, plus a couple Xavier had not seen before, both probably in their 60s, who introduced themselves as Frank and Rose Martin. They had run the dry goods store until it closed, but they still lived above it, unwilling to abandon their home. Town council meeting tonight, Frank announced to the table at large. Not that we have an official town council anymore, but we're all that's left, so we might as well make decisions together. What's there to decide? Tommy asked around a mouthful of eggs. Whether we try to attract new settlers or just accept that Canon City's done for. How would we attract new settlers? Martha asked. We don't have jobs to offer, no gold, no railroad. Land's cheap, Walter pointed out. Some folks might want to start fresh, farm or ranch. The land around here isn't great for farming, Rose said. That's why the town was built on mining, not agriculture. The conversation continued, a familiar argument that had clearly been repeated many times before. Xavier listened, understanding dawning. These people did not want to give up, but they had no idea how to save what they loved. After breakfast, Clara showed him where she kept tools and supplies. The lumber in the shed is left over from when we built the addition 5 years ago. You can use whatever you need. Paint's in the same place. Xavier spent the morning examining the building, making a list of repairs. The porch steps needed reinforcing. Several window frames were rotting and needed replacement. The roof had some missing shingles. The sign did indeed need repainting. It was all doable, and it was all necessary. He started with the porch steps, pulling up the loose boards and examining the supports underneath. Some were solid, some needed replacing. He lost himself in the work, in the satisfaction of fixing something broken. The morning sun grew warm on his shoulders. His hands remembered the skills his father had taught him, back before the old man drank himself to death. At noon, Clara brought him a sandwich and lemonade. You don't have to work through lunch. I'm almost done with this section. Want to finish before I stop. She sat on the porch watching him work. You're good at this. My father was a carpenter when he wasn't drinking, taught me a lot before he died. I'm sorry, Xavier shrugged. It was a long time ago. I was 16. That's young to lose a parent. How old were you? 26 when I lost my father. 27 when my mother followed. I think she died of a broken heart more than the pneumonia. And you've been running this place alone since then? Yes. Some people said I should sell and move to a real city, find a husband, have a normal life. But this is my life. This is what I know. Xavier hammered in a nail, checking the board's stability. Do you want those things? Husband, family. Clara was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. I thought I did once. There was a man, Robert Palmer. He worked at the assayer's office. We courted for almost a year. He proposed, I said yes. Then the mine started failing and he got an offer from a firm in San Francisco. He wanted me to close the boarding house and go with him. I said I couldn't leave, not with my mother so sick. He said he'd wait until she recovered. But she didn't recover, and after she died, he'd already married someone else in San Francisco. He sounds like a fool. Maybe. Or maybe he was just smart enough to choose a future over a past. I'm the fool staying here with ghosts. Xavier stopped working and looked at her directly. You're loyal. You're brave. You're fighting for what you believe in. That's not foolish. That's admirable. Color rose in her cheeks. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. I've seen people abandon everything at the first sign of trouble. You're not one of them. She stood, picking up the empty plate from his sandwich. Well, don't admire me too much. I'm just too stubborn to know better. But she smiled when she said it, and Xavier watched her walk back inside, realizing he was in deeper trouble than he had thought. That evening, the supposed town council meeting convened in Clara's dining room. Besides the usual crowd, 3 more people showed up. A grizzled rancher named Hank Porter whose spread was about 10 miles out of town. A woman named Sarah Chen, who was Tommy's aunt and ran the town's only remaining general store barely. And a former banker named Gregory Wells, who looked too refined for a dying frontier town, but apparently had nowhere else to go. Clara served coffee and the last of the apple pie. Everyone found seats, and Frank Martin called the meeting to order with no real authority but long habit. We all know why we're here, Frank began. Canon City is dying. We can either accept that and make our peace with it, or we can try to do something about it. Question is what? We need people, Sarah said. Can't have a town without people. And how do we get people? Gregory asked. We have nothing to offer them. We have land, Hank pointed out. And it's cheap. Some folks might want that. The land around here is better for ranching than farming, Walter added, and ranching needs a town for supplies for community. Xavier had been listening quietly, but an idea was forming. You need to give people a reason to stay, not just arrive. What made this town work before? Mining, Tommy said, but that's done. What else? Every town needs more than one industry, Clara spoke up. We had shops, services, a school, a church. People came for the gold but stayed because we built a real community. Then build it again, Xavier said. Not for miners, but for ranchers, farmers, anyone looking for a fresh start. Advertise land, cheap prices, a community ready to welcome newcomers. Who's going to see our advertisements? Gregory asked skeptically. And more importantly, who's going to pay for them? Place them in Denver newspapers, in Kansas City, even back east. There are people struggling in cities who might jump at the chance for cheap land and a new beginning. That takes money we don't have, Frank said. Xavier had been thinking about this all afternoon. I have some money saved. Not a fortune, but enough to place a few strategic advertisements. If it works, more people means more business and everyone benefits. The room fell silent. Clara was staring at him like he had grown a second head. You'd spend your savings on a town you just arrived at yesterday. Why not? I have to spend them on something. Might as well be on something that matters. Walter laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling. The man's either a saint or touched in the head. Either way, I say we take him up on it. We'd need to organize, Martha said, practical as always. Make sure we have places for people to stay when they arrive, food, supplies. I can house people, Clara said, and I can cook for more than this handful. My store can be restocked if I know people are coming, Sarah added. Hank nodded slowly. I could use ranch hands. Been running that spread mostly alone since my boys moved to California. If families come, I can offer jobs. The mood in the room shifted from defeated to cautiously hopeful. They talked for 2 more hours, planning and scheming, arguing and agreeing. By the end, they had a rough plan. Xavier would fund advertisements offering cheap land and a fresh start in Canon City. Sarah would write to suppliers about restocking her store. Hank would spread the word among other ranchers in the area that workers would be available. Clara would prepare her boarding house for an influx of potential residents. It was not much, but it was something. It was hope, fragile and uncertain but real. After everyone left, Clara and Xavier cleaned up in the quiet kitchen. She kept glancing at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Why are you really doing this?" she finally asked. Xavier dried the last coffee cup and set it on the shelf. "You said you couldn't leave this town. Earlier you called it your home, said your whole life is here. I've been wandering for a year, looking for something worth staying for. Maybe I found it, in a dying town. In a town full of people who refuse to let it die. In a woman who makes the best apple pie I've ever tasted and gets up at 5 every morning to cook for whoever shows up, even if it's just 2 or 3 people. In the idea that maybe something good can be saved if someone cares enough to try." Clara's eyes were bright, and he realized she was fighting tears. "What if it doesn't work? What if no one comes? Then we tried. That's more than most people can say." She moved closer, and without thinking, Xavier reached out to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. The moment froze, both of them caught in it. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips. Her breath caught. They were standing so close he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Clara," he said softly. The moment shattered as a loud crash came from outside. They broke apart and Xavier rushed to the window. A drunk man was stumbling down the street, having knocked over a barrel. Nothing dangerous, just someone who had found solace in a bottle, but the spell was broken. Clara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's late. I should get some rest." "Clara, I didn't mean to." "It's fine. Good night, Xavier." She disappeared into her private quarters, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the single lamp burning. Xavier extinguished it and climbed the stairs, knowing he had crossed a line he had not even realized was there until he was over it. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Xavier finished the porch repairs and moved on to the roof. He rode into the larger town of Colorado Springs, 35 miles away, where he placed advertisements in 2 newspapers and 1 back east publication that had a Western Territory section. The ads were simple: land and opportunity in Canon City, Colorado. Cheap prices, fresh starts, community welcome settlers. Inquire through Clara's boarding house. He also purchased supplies, lumber, paint, nails, and other necessities. The ride back took a full day, his horse laden with goods. When he returned, Clara met him at the door, worry evident on her face. "You've been gone 2 days. I was starting to think you'd left for good. I told you I was placing the advertisements. You didn't say it would take 2 days. Something warm spread through Xavier's chest. She had been worried about him. "I also got supplies. Figured if people are coming, we should be ready." Over the next week, Xavier repainted the boarding house sign, making it bright and welcoming. He fixed all the window frames, replaced the missing roof shingles, and generally made the place look cared for instead of abandoned. Clara watched his progress, sometimes bringing him water or food, sometimes just standing nearby, and they talked. He learned that she loved to read, that the books in his room were just a small selection of the library she had accumulated. She told him about growing up in Canon City, when it was thriving, about the dances and socials, about the sense of community that had made it feel like the center of the world, even though it was just a small mining town in Colorado. He told her about his years as a lawman, about the satisfaction of helping people and the frustration of a justice system that did not always serve justice. He told her about the wandering year, about sleeping under stars and in flea-bitten hotels, about searching for something he could not name. "And have you found it?" she asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "I think maybe I have." She looked at him, questions in her eyes, but he was not ready to voice what he was feeling. Not yet. It was too new, too fragile. 3 weeks after the advertisements were placed, the first letter arrived. A family from Kansas, the Hendersons, inquiring about land prices and available housing. They had 4 children and experience farming. They were looking for a fresh start after losing their farm to debt. Clara read the letter aloud at dinner that night to the assembled group, and cheers went up. It was one family, but it was a beginning. Sarah immediately wrote back with information about available land parcels, prices, and what the town had to offer. Clara added a note about boarding house rates and meals. Hank scrawled a postscript about ranch work being available. Within another week, 2 more letters arrived. A young couple from Ohio looking to start a ranch. A widow with 3 grown sons wanting to try mining on a small scale, having heard that claims were available cheap. The mood in town shifted. People started cleaning up their properties, fixing what had been allowed to decay. The church got a fresh coat of whitewash thanks to volunteers. Walter organized a group to clear tumbleweeds and debris from the main street. Gregory Wells reopened the bank building, even though he had no official business yet, just to make the town look functional. Xavier worked from dawn to dusk, helping wherever needed. He fixed Sarah's storefront, repaired Martha's boarding house sign, and helped Tommy shore up an old mining office that could be converted to housing if needed. And every morning and evening, he ate with Clara, their conversations growing longer and more personal. He learned that she hummed while she cooked, always the same tune her mother used to sing. She learned that he read poetry late at night when he could not sleep, especially Whitman. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Xavier found Clara in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her head in her hands. He had never seen her like this. Her usual strength crumbled. "Clara, what's wrong?" She looked up, and he saw tears on her cheeks. "What if they come and it's not enough? What if we get their hopes up and then the town dies anyway and we've just dragged them into our failure?" Xavier pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "Then we fail trying, which is better than succeeding at giving up. Is it? I keep thinking about all the people who already left, all the families who saw the writing on the wall and got out while they could. Maybe they were the smart ones. Maybe. Or maybe they missed out on being part of something amazing. There's nothing amazing about a dying town. There's everything amazing about people who refuse to let it die. Clara, you get up every morning and cook breakfast for a handful of people who might not even show up. You maintain this building like it's a palace instead of a boarding house in a failing town. You care for your neighbors, your community, even when it would be easier to walk away. That's not failure, that's heroism." She laughed through her tears. "I'm not a hero, I'm just stubborn. Sometimes they are the same thing." He reached out and took her hand, her fingers cold in his. "I'm not leaving, Clara. Whatever happens, I'm staying. I promised you that." "No, you didn't. You said you'd rent a room for a week. That was a month ago." "Then let me promise now, I'm staying." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. Why, this was it, the moment of truth. Xavier took a breath. "Because I'm falling in love with you. Because in the span of a month, you've become the reason I get up in the morning. Because your strength inspires me, your kindness humbles me, and your presence makes me believe that good things can last. I'm staying because leaving would mean walking away from the best thing I've ever found." Clara's eyes widened, tears still glistening on her lashes. "Xavier, you barely know me. I know enough. I know you're loyal, brave, and stubborn in the best possible way. I know you make terrible coffee but amazing pie. I know you hum when you think no one is listening, and you read the same book over and over when you're worried. I know you carry the weight of this town on your shoulders and refuse to put it down. What else do I need to know? You could have anyone. Why choose someone tethered to a dying town? Because you're not tethered, you're anchored. There's a difference, and I want to be anchored too. I'm tired of drifting. She pulled her hand from his and stood, pacing the kitchen. Xavier's heart sank, certain he had ruined everything. But then she turned, and there was something fierce in her expression. I told you about Robert, about how he left. I won't go through that again. I can't. If you're saying these things, you have to mean them. Not just today, not just while it's exciting and new, but when things get hard. When the town might fail anyway. When life gets ordinary and difficult. Xavier stood and crossed to her. I was a lawman for 8 years. I wore a star and promised to protect people every single day, through boredom and danger, through thankless work and impossible situations. I kept that promise until the system broke it for me. I don't make promises lightly, Clara. When I say I'm staying, I mean I'm staying. When I say I'm falling in love with you, I mean I'm falling in love with you. Not with an idea or a fantasy, but with the real woman standing in front of me. She searched his face, looking for any hint of deception or doubt. He let her look, having nothing to hide. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to. I told myself you were just passing through, that I was being foolish. But every morning when you came down for breakfast, every evening when we talked over dishes, every time you smiled at me, I fell a little more. Xavier cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Then stop trying not to. Let yourself fall. I promise I'll be there to catch you. When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Clara's arms wrapped around his neck and Xavier pulled her close, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. It was tender and passionate, hesitant and certain all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words feeling right and true. I love you too, she replied and smiled. A real smile full of joy and hope. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while outside the dying town slept, dreaming of rebirth. The next morning, Xavier came down to find Clara already in the kitchen, humming as she cooked. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made his heart race. They did not speak, just moved around each other with new awareness, stealing touches and glances. At breakfast, Walter took one look at them and grinned. Well, it's about time. What are you talking about? Clara asked, but she was blushing. You two have been dancing around each other for weeks. We all saw it. Glad you finally figured it out. Martha laughed. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in a room together. This town doesn't have enough people for secrets, Tommy added, looking amused. Xavier reached under the table and took Clara's hand. She squeezed back, and they shared a smile that needed no words. 2 days later, the Henderson family arrived. They came in a wagon loaded with all their possessions, looking tired and hopeful and terrified all at once. Charles Henderson was in his early 40s, weathered and strong. His wife Emma was younger, maybe 35, with kind eyes and capable hands. Their 4 children ranged from age 7 to 15, all looking around at Canon City with wide eyes. Clara welcomed them like long-lost family, showing them to rooms and promising a hot meal. Sarah came running from her store with supplies. Frank and Rose brought fresh bread. Hank rode in to talk to Charles about work. By evening, the Hendersons were seated in Clara's dining room, overwhelmed by the welcome. We didn't expect this, Emma said, tears in her eyes. We thought we'd be strangers. Your neighbors now, Clara replied. That's how it works here. Over the next few days, they helped the Hendersons settle. Charles looked at land parcels with Hank and Frank, finally choosing a 100-acre spread that had good water and could support cattle or crops. The price was so low compared to Kansas that he could pay in cash and still have money left for supplies and livestock. Emma was immediately drawn to Clara, and the two women became fast friends. She helped in the kitchen, learning Clara's recipes and sharing her own. Her children, though shy at first, were soon running around town, bringing life and noise to streets that had been silent too long. The young couple from Ohio, Daniel and Grace Parker, arrived next. They were both 24, newly married, and bursting with energy and ideas. Daniel had worked on his father's ranch and was eager to start his own. Grace had teaching experience and was thrilled to learn the town had a schoolhouse, even if it had been closed for 2 years. Xavier helped Daniel find land adjacent to Hank's spread, creating the beginning of a ranching community. Grace worked with Martha and Rose to clean and restock the schoolhouse, preparing for the day when there would be enough children to justify reopening it. The widow, Naomi Carter, arrived with her 3 sons, all in their 20s. She was a formidable woman in her 50s who had been a miner's wife and knew the business. Her sons were strong and willing to work. They took over several abandoned claims and an old mining office building that Xavier and Tommy helped them convert to living quarters. Within 2 months, Canon City's population had grown by 17 people. It was not enough to return the town to its former glory, but it was enough to change the feeling from dying to surviving. More letters came in response to the advertisements. A blacksmith from Missouri looking to relocate. A doctor who had lost his practice to a fire and wanted a fresh start. A family of farmers from Illinois. Each one was carefully vetted through correspondence, invited to visit, and welcomed when they arrived. The general store reopened fully, with Sarah hiring Emma Henderson to help. The schoolhouse rang with children's voices as Grace taught 6 students, including the Henderson children, and 2 others whose families had been on the verge of leaving but now decided to stay. The church held its first service in a year, led by Charles Henderson, who had been a lay preacher back in Kansas. Xavier found himself becoming an informal leader, organizing work parties, helping newcomers settle, and mediating the occasional dispute. It was not so different from being a marshal, except the problems were about property lines and water rights instead of crime and violence. And through it all, his relationship with Clara deepened. They were careful about propriety. Her reputation mattered in a small town, but everyone knew they were courting. They took walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. They sat together at community gatherings. She mended his shirts. He fixed anything in her building that needed attention. 4 months after Xavier had first ridden into town, he proposed. It was not a grand gesture, just the 2 of them sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the stars come out. "Marry me," he said simply. Clara turned to him, eyes wide. "What? Marry me? I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you run this boarding house and raise children and grow old in this town we're saving together. Marry me, Clara. We've only known each other 4 months, and I've loved you for most of them. Time doesn't change what I feel." She was quiet for a moment and Xavier's heart pounded. Then she smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed her face. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her close and kissed her, and she kissed him back with all the love and passion she felt. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "I didn't think I'd ever have this," she said. "After Robert left, after my parents died, I thought I'd spend my life alone. And then you rode into town on a half-dead horse and started fixing my porch." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier said, and meant it with his whole heart. They were married 6 weeks later in the town church. Emma helped Clara make a simple but beautiful dress from fabric Sarah ordered special. Rose and Martha decorated the church with wildflowers. Walter gave Clara away, emotional and proud. Hank stood up as Xavier's best man, though they had only known each other a few months. The entire town attended, all 63 residents, original and new. It was not a grand wedding, but it was filled with love and community. When Xavier kissed his bride, cheers erupted. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, with tables set up outside to accommodate everyone. Clara had prepared a feast with help from Emma and the other women. There was dancing and singing and laughter that echoed through streets that had been silent for too long. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Xavier pulled his wife onto the porch, stealing a moment alone. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy I could burst," Clara replied. "I never imagined this, any of it, neither did I, but I'm grateful for every moment." She leaned against him and they watched their neighbors celebrate. "We did it, you know, we saved the town. We're still saving it, it's a work in progress." "But it's working. That's what matters." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Mrs. Ashford. I love you too, Mr. Ashford." The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and joy. The town continued to grow slowly but steadily. By the end of 1883, the population had reached nearly 100 people. A proper blacksmith set up shop. The doctor opened a small clinic. 2 more families started ranches. The mines saw small-scale operations that were sustainable if not profitable. Clara ran the boarding house with Xavier's help, though it transitioned from housing transients to being more of a hotel for visiting family members and business travelers. They converted one wing into their private residence, creating a real home. Xavier was elected town marshal, though the job was mostly settling disputes and very occasional actual law enforcement. He wore a star again, but this time it felt right. This time the system worked because the community made it work. In the spring of 1884, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Xavier was overjoyed, hovering over her until she threatened to hit him with a spatula. The whole town celebrated, bringing gifts and advice. Emma Henderson, who had been through 4 pregnancies, became Clara's constant companion and source of reassurance. Their son was born in November, healthy and loud. They named him Thomas, after Xavier's father, giving the name a new and better legacy. Xavier held his son and felt something settle in his chest, a contentment he had never known. Canon City continued to grow. The railroad, hearing about the town's revival, sent surveyors to assess the route again. While no promises were made, it was a sign that they were being noticed. Eastern newspapers ran stories about the dying town that refused to die, inspiring more families to take a chance on starting fresh. By 1885, the population had reached 150. The school had 12 students. The church was full on Sundays. Main Street bustled with activity. New buildings were going up. It was not the boom town it had been in the 1870s, but it was alive and growing. Clara and Xavier's second child, a daughter they named Rose after one of the town's stalwart residents, was born in 1886. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and Xavier was completely smitten. Life settled into a rhythm. Xavier worked as marshal and helped with the boarding house. Clara managed the kitchen and raised their children. They were part of a community that valued each member, where neighbors helped neighbors, where children grew up knowing they belonged. One evening in 1887, sitting on their porch with Thomas playing at their feet and Rose sleeping in Clara's arms, Xavier reflected on the 5 years since he had ridden into Canon City on a dying horse. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd kept riding that day?" Clara asked, reading his thoughts as she often did. "Sometimes, but I try not to. This is where I was meant to be, I'm glad you stopped. So am I." He looked at his family, his town, his life. "I spent a year wandering, looking for something worth staying for. I found it here. I found you." Clara shifted Rose to one arm and took Xavier's hand with the other. "And I was ready to spend my life alone, holding on to the past. You gave me a future instead. We gave each other a future." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. From their porch, they could see Main Street, alive with people heading home from work, children playing, neighbors chatting. The mountains rose eternal in the distance, and somewhere a church bell rang, calling people to evening service. Canon City had been saved, not by one person but by a community that refused to give up. But it had started with a cowboy who chose to stop wandering and a woman who said she'd stay if he did. They had kept their promises to each other, and in doing so, had given a dying town new life. Years passed, and the town continued to thrive. The railroad finally came through in 1889, bringing new prosperity. By 1890, Canon City had a population of over 300, with more arriving every month. Main Street was lined with thriving businesses. The school had 2 teachers. The church added a second building for social gatherings. Ranches dotted the surrounding land, creating an economy based on cattle and agriculture rather than the uncertain promise of gold. Walter lived to see it all, sitting on his bench and greeting newcomers, telling them stories about the old days and the rebirth. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1891, age 87, surrounded by a town that loved him. His funeral was attended by everyone, and Xavier gave the eulogy, talking about stubbornness and loyalty and refusing to give up. Martha, Rose, Frank, and the other originals became legends in their own time, the ones who had stayed when everyone else left. They were honored and respected, their names given to streets and buildings. The new school was named Rose and Frank Martin Elementary. The town park became Walter Pierce Park. Tommy struck a small but profitable vein of gold in 1892, finally vindicating his stubborn optimism. He used the money to expand his claim and hire workers, creating jobs and bringing more people to town. He married Sarah's daughter in 1893, keeping the connection between old families and new. Hank's ranch became one of the largest in the region, and his partnership with Daniel Parker created a ranching cooperative that brought prosperity to many families. When Hank passed in 1895, Daniel continued the legacy, teaching his own sons the business and the values of hard work and community. Xavier and Clara's family grew. After Rose came another son, Walter, named for the man who had given Clara away at her wedding. Then another daughter, Martha, and finally a surprise late arrival in 1894, another son they named Charles after Charles Henderson, who had been the first family to answer their call for settlers. The boarding house became a landmark, known throughout Colorado as a place of excellent food and warm hospitality. Clara trained her daughters in the business, and Rose, who showed particular aptitude, took over much of the cooking by the time she was 16, allowing Clara to focus on management and family. Xavier served as town marshal for 12 years before stepping down in 1895 to focus on family and working with the town council to plan for continued growth. His reputation for fair dealing and wisdom made him a natural leader, and he was elected mayor in 1896, a position he held for the next decade. In 1898, on their 16th anniversary, Xavier and Clara renewed their vows in the same church where they had married. The ceremony was attended by over 100 people, many of whom had come to Canon City because of the advertisements Xavier had funded and the community Clara had nurtured. It was a celebration not just of their marriage, but of everything they had built together. As they stood at the altar, older and grayer but still deeply in love, Xavier thought about the man he had been when he rode into town, lost and searching for purpose. Clara thought about the woman she had been, resigned to watching her world slowly die. They had saved each other as surely as they had saved the town. "I love you," Xavier whispered as they kissed. "I love you too," Clara whispered back. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me a reason to." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Canon City weathered an economic downturn in 1899, but survived because of the diversified economy and strong community bonds. The town rallied together, supporting businesses through hard times, sharing resources, and refusing to let anyone fall too far. By the turn of the century, Canon City was firmly established as a thriving town with a population approaching 500. It had a hospital, 3 schools, 2 churches, a library, and dozens of businesses. The railroad brought regular service, connecting them to the wider world. But it maintained the tight-knit community feeling that had been its salvation. Xavier and Clara's children grew into fine adults. Thomas became a doctor, studying in Denver before returning to Canon City to practice. Rose married a rancher and took over the boarding house, running it with the same care her mother had shown. Walter became a lawyer, fighting for justice in ways that made his father proud. Martha became a teacher, carrying on Grace Parker's legacy. Young Charles, showing his grandfather's carpentry skills, became a builder, constructing many of the new homes and businesses that marked the town's growth. In 1905, Xavier and Clara became grandparents when Thomas and his wife welcomed a daughter. More grandchildren followed over the years, filling their lives with renewed joy and purpose. They loved watching their children raise families in the town they had saved, continuing the legacy of community and care. On quiet evenings, Xavier and Clara would sit on their porch, just as they had done for over 20 years, and watch the town they loved. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, content in the knowledge that their love had created something lasting. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one evening in 1910. "You could have gone anywhere, done anything. Instead, you stayed in a dying town for a stubborn woman who refused to leave." Xavier, now 59 years old with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling, pulled her close. "Not for one single moment. This dying town became my home. That stubborn woman became my heart. I've lived a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning." What more could any man want? Clara, 56 and still beautiful in Xavier's eyes, rested her head on his shoulder. "I was so scared when you first arrived. Scared to hope, scared to believe things could get better, scared to love again. You taught me that hope is stronger than fear. We taught each other. You showed me what it means to be truly loyal, to love something so deeply you'll fight for it against impossible odds. You showed me home." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in the same oranges and golds they had watched together for decades. Their town bustled around them, alive and vibrant. Children played in the street, including several of their grandchildren. Neighbors called greetings. The church bell rang, marking the hour. In 1915, the town threw a grand celebration for Xavier and Clara's 33rd anniversary. It was also a celebration of Canon City itself, which had just been officially recognized as one of Colorado's fastest-growing towns. The population had reached 800, with more arriving every month. At the celebration, held in the town square that bore Walter Pierce's name, the mayor gave a speech about the town's history. He told the story of how Canon City had been on the verge of becoming a ghost town, how a handful of stubborn residents had refused to give up, and how a cowboy and a woman with a boarding house had sparked its rebirth. "We owe our town to Xavier and Clara Ashford," the mayor said. "They believed in us when we barely believed in ourselves. They invested not just money but heart and soul into making Canon City a place worth staying for. They showed us that love, loyalty, and hard work can overcome any obstacle." Xavier stood and pulled Clara up beside him. "We didn't save this town alone," he said. "Walter, Martha, Rose, Frank, Tommy, Sarah, Hank, and all the others who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, they saved it. The Hendersons, the Parkers, the Carters, and every family who took a chance on starting fresh here, they saved it. We just refused to let it die without a fight, and we won." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Xavier kissed his wife in front of everyone, not caring who saw. After 33 years, he still loved her as deeply as he had that day in the kitchen when he'd first told her his feelings. As they grew older, Xavier and Clara remained active in the community. They attended every wedding, every funeral, every celebration. They welcomed new residents and mentored young couples. They told stories about the old days to anyone who would listen, ensuring the town's history was never forgotten. In 1920, at the age of 69, Clara suffered a fall that left her with a broken hip. It healed slowly, and for the first time, she was forced to slow down. Rose took over the day-to-day operations of the boarding house completely, though Clara still supervised from her favorite chair in the kitchen, offering advice and recipes. Xavier, now 70 years old, retired from all official duties to care for his wife. Their children and grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and laughter. Xavier read to Clara from the books she loved, particularly the poetry of Walt Whitman that had seen them through so many quiet evenings. One night, as Xavier read Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, Clara interrupted him. "Do you remember the night I broke down? When I was so scared we'd fail, I remember. You asked what if it wasn't enough. You said we'd fail trying, which is better than succeeding at giving up. That changed everything for me. It made me brave enough to hope, to love you, to believe in a future." Xavier set down the book and took her hand. "You were already brave. You just needed someone to remind you. We reminded each other." She squeezed his hand, her grip still strong despite her age. "Promise me something, anything. When I'm gone, don't stop living. Keep going to the town meetings, keep telling our story, keep loving this place we built. Promise me." "Clara, you're not going anywhere. Promise me, Xavier." He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. "I promise." "But you have to promise me the same. We're not done yet. We still have grandchildren to spoil and a town to watch grow." She smiled. "Deal." Clara lived another 5 years, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1925 at the age of 73. The entire town mourned. Her funeral was attended by over 300 people, and the service had to be moved outside to accommodate everyone. Xavier stood strong, supported by his children, and gave a eulogy that celebrated her life, her strength, and her unwavering love for her community. "My wife saved a town," he said, his voice breaking only slightly. "She fed people when she could barely afford it. She welcomed strangers like family. She loved fiercely and loyally. She taught all of us what it means to never give up." Canon City exists because Clara Cunningham Ashford believed it should. And it will continue to thrive because her legacy lives on in every person she touched, every meal she served, every kindness she showed. I loved her for 43 years, and I'll love her for whatever time I have left. After Clara's death, Xavier kept his promise. He remained active in the community, though the loss of his wife left a hole nothing could fill. His children made sure he was never alone, rotating visits and meals. His grandchildren, now numbering 14, kept him young with their energy and questions. He still sat on the porch every evening, sometimes with visitors, sometimes alone, watching the town that had been saved by love and stubbornness. He told stories to anyone who would listen, about Clara and Walter and the handful of people who had refused to let Canon City die. In 1928, Canon City celebrated its 70th anniversary with a week-long festival. The population had grown to over 1,500. The town had become a regional center for ranching and agriculture, with a thriving downtown and excellent schools. The governor of Colorado attended the celebration and gave a speech about small-town American values. Xavier, now 77 years old, was honored as the town's founding father, though he insisted on sharing that honor with the memories of Clara and the other originals. At the celebration, he stood before the assembled crowd and told the story one more time. In 1882, I rode into Canon City on a half-dead horse, looking for nothing in particular. What I found was a dying town, a stubborn woman, and the purpose I'd been searching for. Canon City was down to about 50 people, most of them ready to give up. But a few, Clara Cunningham especially, refused to quit. She said she'd stay no matter what, so I said I'd stay if she did. And we stayed. We fought. We loved. We built. And look at what we created together. He gestured to the thriving town around them. This is what happens when people refuse to give up. This is what love can build. Clara used to say I saved her town, but the truth is she saved me. She gave me a home, a purpose, a family, and a legacy I'm proud of. Every person here is part of that legacy. Every building, every business, every family. We are Canon City and we never give up. The crowd roared its approval and Xavier sat down, tired but content. He had kept his promise to Clara, continuing to live fully and celebrate what they had built together. Xavier Ashford passed away in his sleep on a cool autumn evening in 1930, at the age of 79. He died in the house he had shared with Clara, surrounded by family, having lived to see his town grow beyond anything he could have imagined. His funeral was the largest Canon City had ever seen, with people traveling from across Colorado to pay respects to the man who had saved their town. He was buried next to Clara in the town cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, Xavier Ashford, 1851–1930. Husband, father, marshal, mayor, friend. He stayed. The town continued to thrive, generation after generation, built on the foundation of community and perseverance that Xavier and Clara had established. Their children and grandchildren continued their legacy of service and care. The boarding house, now called Clara's Historic Inn, operated for another 50 years before being converted to a museum celebrating the town's history. Main Street was renamed Ashford Avenue in their honor. A statue was erected in the town square showing Xavier and Clara standing together, looking toward the future. Every year on the anniversary of Xavier's arrival, the town held a celebration called Founders' Day, telling the story to new generations. The story of the cowboy who rode into a dying town, and the woman who said she'd stay if he did became legend, passed down through families, taught in schools, and celebrated as an example of what love, loyalty, and stubborn determination can achieve. Canon City never forgot the couple who had saved it, and the legacy of Xavier and Clara Ashford lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love, the strength of community, and the courage to fight for what matters, no matter the odds. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Canon City in the 21st century, carrying on the values their ancestors had embodied. The town that had once been dying had become a thriving community of thousands, all because a cowboy chose to stay, and a woman found the courage to hope again. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Xavier and Clara were together still, watching over the town they loved, proud of everything it had become, and grateful for the day a half-dead horse had carried a wandering cowboy into their destiny.